Every year, thousands of female athletes hear the same unmistakable pop, the sound of a torn ACL. It's not just bad luck, it's a warning sign from their musculoskeletal system that it's failing to protect them. Despite the science and the statistics, we're still not doing enough. We need to stop treating ACL tears on men and women the same because they are not the same. A woman has different bone structure, hormones, and muscle mass than a man. Girls are stepping into sports with more passion and more talent than ever before, but they're also stepping into a silent epidemic. Female athletes are 2 to 8 times more likely to tear their ACLs than their male counterparts, not because they're weaker, not because they're doing something wrong, but because they move their bodies differently. And we have built sports systems centered around men instead of both genders equally. This isn't just about an injury, it's about a gap in training, a gap in knowledge, and a gap in care. It's about changing that gap before more dreams become sidelined. The goal here is simple: to raise awareness, to educate more people about female ACL tears, and to prevent more women from getting injured. I'm sure we've all heard of the ACL, but honestly, not many people could clearly point to one on a diagram. Don't worry, I'll help you out. The ACL stands for anterior, meaning front, cruciate, meaning cross, and ligament, meaning it holds 2 bones together. In this case, it holds the back of our thigh bone to the front of our shin bone, which helps to stabilize the knee during rotating, pivoting, and cutting until it doesn't. From the moment girls step onto the court or field or court or even out of bed, they carry a hidden risk built into their bodies. This is the picture of the lower portion of a man and a woman. Notice the difference in the male and female pelvis and knees. Since the female pelvis is wider, the femur, also known as the thigh bone, slopes inward more sharply toward the knee. This increases the Q angle between the knee and the hip and places extra stress on the soft tissue that supports the joints of the knee. The stress increases dramatically during fast-paced sports like volleyball, soccer, skiing, etc. In action, this increases the stress on the tissue, which increases the risk that the knee will collapse inward, an action called a valgus collapse. Oh wait, there we go. The built-up tension on the ACL becomes too much, and it tries to hold on until it can't anymore, so it collapses. But there is more to the story. We can close this gap by advances in physical therapy and training regimens so that neuromuscular training is designed and focused uniquely for women's anatomy and sports. We can also close this gap by learning more about our hormones and how they affect ligament laxity. When we talk about preventing ACL tears, especially in women, we need to start thinking beyond just strength and conditioning. We need to focus on neuromuscular training, or NMT. NMT is a revolutionary approach to injury prevention that targets the way the body moves. It improves control, balance, and power during the quick, explosive movements that often lead to ACL tears. Think of it like rewiring the body's response system, training it to react more efficiently and safely. What's the best part? The research shows that doing these exercises just 2 times a week for 20 minutes each session can significantly decrease the risk of tearing your ACL. The AMJ Sports Medicine Journal also found that well-controlled neuromuscular training for ACL injury prevention can reduce the risk for ACL tears by up to 50% in female athletes. The more you engage in neuromuscular training, the lower your risk becomes. And it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach. Every athlete is unique with different strengths and weaknesses. That means that neuromuscular training is designed uniquely is tailored to fit individual needs, ensuring that each athlete gets the specific training they need for their body. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get talked about a lot. The fact that a woman's phase of the menstrual cycle can increase or decrease our risk of tearing our ACL. I hadn't heard a lot about it, but when I really started digging into the science, I realized it truly does play a large role. Here's what's going on. Throughout the menstrual cycle, a woman's hormones fluctuate dramatically. Estradiol, a form of estrogen, peaks around ovulation. That's days 12 to 14 in a typical cycle. And that's also when we start to see a rise in ACL injuries. Why? Because rising estrogen levels are linked to increased ligament laxity, meaning your joints get a little looser, meaning less stable. That's critical when you think about how an ACL tear happens. It's usually a non-contact injury when the tibia suddenly shifts forward and rotates inward. If the ligament is already more lax, that pivot shift becomes far more dangerous. Women who have been pregnant or who are pregnant know this feeling. As women progress through pregnancy, it gets harder and harder for them to open jars because of the increased ligament laxity in their wrists. But it's not just about the ligaments. Hormones also influence the way muscles fire. 2 studies looked at neuromuscular control across the menstrual cycle using EMG, a method that measures muscle activation. The 2 studies found increased quadriceps activity in the follicular phase and higher medial hamstring activity during ovulation. Those imbalances can lead to poor knee alignment, again, raising injury risk. Now here's where hormonal birth control comes in, specifically combined oral contraceptives, those that include both estrogen and progesterone. The 2 hormones combined suppress ovulation. That means there's no hormonal surge, no estradiol spike, and potentially less ligament laxity. Women on combined oral contraceptives had a 20% lower rate of ACL tears than women not on oral contraceptives. Of course, we need more data. Most of these studies were done on combined contraceptives, so we can't speak for progesterone-only methods yet. And although this information is still very new, in the future, we can expect much more research on this topic as it becomes more prevalent. To truly prevent ACL tears in female athletes, we must stop ignoring the very real, very unique physiological differences that set women apart. We need to challenge the outdated systems that treat male and female athletes the same and instead embrace an approach that's tailored to the female body. This isn't just a call for injury prevention, it's a call for change. It's a call to stop letting women play the game they love with one hand tied behind their backs. We owe it to every young female athlete out there to give them the same level of care, attention, and research that male athletes have had for decades. The time for change is now. Let's protect their bodies, protect their dreams, and ensure that every girl who steps onto the field knows that we've got her back.
My MedEx Talk is saving lives before they're lost. Giving birth has become second nature to Americans and other developed nations. Most women feel comfortable going to a hospital and putting their and their child's life in the hands of healthcare professionals. This wasn't always the case. Maternal death rate in 1920 was 850 deaths per 100,000 births. In the last century, our numbers have improved drastically. The current statistic is 18 deaths per 100,000 births. In other countries, the numbers have been stagnant for many years. Countries like Nigeria, Chad, Afghanistan, Venezuela, and Bangladesh still have 200 plus deaths per 100,000 births yearly, with the highest being in South Sudan having 1,223. Access to skilled personnel, modern equipment, and safe delivery practices would increase maternal survival. Many countries surrounding these underdeveloped nations have resources and funds to help, but have fallen short. Providing access to skilled healthcare, modern equipment, and comprehensive maternal support, we can dramatically reduce maternal mortality, which in return will foster healthier families and build stronger and more resilient societies worldwide. While this may seem harder to achieve now that the U.S. is cutting back on aid to underdeveloped nations, we cannot and should not give up. In many impoverished or traditional communities, women frequently do not have an option when it comes to giving birth. It is viewed as a societal obligation rather than a personal decision. Cultural traditions, gender roles, and a lack of access to education and reproductive health care mean that women are frequently expected to become mothers regardless of their desires or preparation. Women in countries like Africa, South America, and Asia will have several children back-to-back regardless of the effects on their bodies. For example, in Africa, on average, there are 4.3 children per household, which is almost 2 times the global average, which is 2.3. In certain areas like sub-Saharan Africa, it is nearly 7 per household. Early marriages, pressure from families or communities, and limited access to contraception leave many women with little control over their reproductive lives. Even if women in these nations were to attempt to use birth control, they would often be ridiculed or ostracized by their community. In these settings, motherhood is frequently regarded as a responsibility rather than a right, and denying or delaying childbirth can result in social humiliation or even punishment. In addition to having multiple children back to back, with little time for the mother's body to recover, it can place significant physical stress on her health. This can result in anemia, uterine rupture, nutritional deficits, and increased risks of premature birth or low birth rate in subsequent pregnancies. The body needs time to replace required nutrients and reestablish hormone balance and recover the stresses from childbirth. Without enough time between pregnancies, subsequent pregnancies can be more difficult for both the mother and the child. Improving maternal health through technology and education not only reduces mortality, but contributes to economic stability by keeping women healthy and productive. You may be wondering, The World Health Organization reported that Southern Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa accounted for 70% of the 260,000 maternal deaths in 2023. The death of a mother can be detrimental on a child and its community. In these more traditional areas, women carry the brunt of childcare. In addition to running the household and raising children, mothers frequently act as main providers and emotional pillars. Their absence can cause mental and financial distress, as well as difficulties raising children. Extended family may try to come and fill in the gap, but it leaves a profound and emotional hole that may impact the growth of the children and the general well-being of the home. Improving maternal health leads to lower healthcare costs, higher labor force participation, and better outcomes for children, and these factors stimulate long-term economic growth and social stability. You may be wondering, what can we do? Several organizations provide direct donations for maternal and neonatal health care. In these underdeveloped nations, advancing birthing technology and improving outcomes. These organizations include Direct Relief, AABC, and United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. They focus on improving access to essential services, training healthcare professionals, and supporting research and developing maternal health. They accept donations from private government, private donors, and international companies. These funds can come from international aid, national health budgets, and transparent partnerships and targeted investments ensure that the support reaches the communities most in need. Since 2008, UNFPA's Maternal and Newborn Health Thematic Fund has facilitated safe delivery for over 30 million women and has trained more than 550,000 midwives. UNFPA has estimated that ending the preventable maternal deaths in 120 priority countries by 2030 would require an investment of approximately $103.6 billion. This amount is comparable to 1,500 fighter jets or the 5 years of annual profit from the NFL. This investment would focus on scaling up maternal health interventions, improving access to quality care, and addressing systemic health issues. Additionally, a combined investment of $79 billion from 2022 to 2030 is projected to end unmet needs of family planning and preventable maternal deaths. Developed nations have a critical responsibility to support undeveloped countries in improving maternal and child health outcomes. They help close the access gap to quality maternal health care by offering financial assistance, modern medical equipment, and critical healthcare resources. Such assistance permits the training of qualified healthcare staff, the enhancement of medical infrastructure, and the provision of life-saving interventions during pregnancy and labor. Developed countries can play a transformative role in lowering maternal mortality and advancing global health equity. We need to ensure that every woman has access to healthy birth because where a child is born should not determine whether or not their mother lives to see their newborn's face. And I'm done.
By a show of hands, how many of you played a sport when you were younger? Chances are you enjoyed that sport and most of you didn't suffer an overuse injury in high school or middle school, but that's not the case for a lot of young athletes today. Most likely, only a small number of you who played sports back in the day felt pressure from high expectations of family or coaches. If you know me, you know I love sports and wouldn't trade my experience for the world, but I'm concerned that trends that may not have been felt even 20 to 30 years ago are being felt more and more today as youth sports take on a new intensity. Even on my high school softball team, each one of us has had at least one overuse injury in our recent time playing sports, and we're all feeling the stress of trying to manage softball 6 days a week combined with school and jobs.
We've suffered labrum injuries that required surgery, along with general shoulder, elbow, and knee overuse injuries that have taken us out for multiple weeks. Even this season, our starting left fielder had to miss 2 weeks due to an overuse injury. As youth sports take on a new professional character nationwide, effects like this have been detrimental to the mental and physical health of our youth athletes, and more kids are quitting the sports they formerly enjoyed. We need to pause this trend before the majority of kids stop playing sports, and we have to make sure that sports go back to being fun for all athletes. To say youth sports have become professionalized might sound like a contradiction in terms, but it means that the fun and light environment is being replaced with a high-intensity one. This means that coaches are taking games and practices more and more seriously. This is increasing the training demands on the still developing bodies of young athletes, and it's been taking a real toll on their health. These athletes are practicing upwards of 4 times a week, and without proper rest, it results in overuse injuries that are becoming more and more common. Kids especially are more susceptible to injuries as they're still growing. Their skeletons are less tolerant of stress than those of adults, and this makes them more likely to develop a stress injury, increasing the risk of an overuse injury. Additionally, bones grow faster than muscles in kids, and this uneven growth pattern makes younger athletes even more susceptible to muscle, tendon, and growth plate injuries. These injuries include growth plate inflammation, stress fractures, and ligament or tendon tears. These overuse injuries can be treated with complete rest, but if they are played through and go untreated, as coaches may be encouraging, it can lead to chronic pain, worsening stress fractures, or complete damage to tendons, ligaments, or muscles. This can cause kids to withdraw from sports completely as pain becomes intolerable or the injury gets in the way of their performance or lifestyle. Another factor fueling youth overuse injuries is sports specialization. I read a book a few months ago that was all about specialists and generalists, and my parents, who are sitting out there tonight, know how much this book bored me, but it taught me a valuable lesson that can be applied here, in which being a generalist is advantageous to being highly specialized. In terms of youth sports, this means that being involved in a wide range of activities is more beneficial than focusing in on one sport and its repetitive movements. In fact, the myth that every professional athlete focused on his or her sport from the age of 3 to the exclusion of all others is just that, a myth. This isn't necessarily to say that kids can't focus on one sport, but focusing on one increases the risk of an overuse injury by 70%. For years, sports medicine organizations have commonly been against early sports specialization in young athletes and recommend a multi-sport sampling pathway. This path allows kids to develop a wide range of skills, and it balances the stress placed on their bodies, whereas sports with biomechanical repetition typically result in sufficient repetitive stress of body structures that exceeds the healing capacity of the tissue. Some people mistakenly believe that playing one sport decreases the risk of an overuse injury, but rather than working on total athleticism, specialized athletes are working on the same thing over and over again, which has led to higher rates of Tommy John surgeries or UCL repairment and other types of elbow ligament reconstruction surgeries. The benefits of specializing in one sport don't include a decreased risk of overuse injuries, and instead makes nation's young athletes more prone to them. Typically, sports participation promotes the physical and emotional well-being of children and encourages the lifelong habit of exercise. Playing multiple sports has been shown to increase the athleticism of young kids and has proved to have lifelong benefits like leadership skills, better social skills, a higher self-esteem, improved fitness, and even better performance in the classroom. It helps on the field too, where playing multiple sports brings about increased resilience and mental toughness and a higher sports IQ, which is beneficial for anyone wanting to play at the professional level. Some coaches and parents may think that specializing in one sport may be important, but this hasn't been proven. In fact, many of the world's professional athletes were multi-sport athletes, including a full 87% of 2015 NFL draft picks. In the entire NFL, the average number of multi-sport athletes hovers around 70%. Now, behind me might be a familiar face, but for those who don't know, it's Bo Jackson, who is arguably one of the best athletes to ever play. What makes him even more special is that he was a multi-sport athlete at the professional level, and he received all-star recognition in both football and baseball. While he may be a standout athlete, he's a prime example that you don't need to specialize at a young age to make it to the big leagues. When adolescents do choose to specialize at young ages, it can have backward effects and be harmful to their health. The last detrimental effect of the professionalization of youth sports that I want to touch on is how it's harming the mental health of the nation's young athletes. It's putting more stress on young minds and is causing kids to quit the sports they began playing for fun. 60 million children and adolescents currently play sports, but 70% of them are quitting before they reach age 13. While a lot of factors come into that statistic, the new intensity of youth sports has led to an increase in perceived pressure, a loss of enjoyment, and has ultimately led to burnout, which has been a contributor to this loss of athletes. This isn't to say that kids should stop playing sports, but it goes to show that as a society, we have a responsibility to make sure that youth sports remain enjoyable. They have formerly been a happy place for many athletes, but now they are becoming increasingly stressful. Increased pressure and expectations from coaches, teammates, families, and intrinsic factors like perfectionism and high self-expectations can cause immense amounts of stress.
This stress can lead to loss of motivation, mood disturbances, and ultimately burnout. Not only can this be harmful to mental health, but it puts kids in an even higher risk for overuse injuries. Increased psychological stress has been shown to undermine recovery and is likely to contribute to the accumulation of physical stress that results in overuse injuries. This, combined with psychological stress, is causing kids to lose playing time from their sports, further causing them to want to quit. Trends are already showing that youth participation in sports has started to decline. The benefits of youth sports are immense, and when kids quit, it can be bad for their overall health. Discontinuing sports during childhood is partially responsible for over 75% of adolescents in the U.S. who fail to meet physical activity recommendations. However, for some kids under intense pressure, this doesn't sound like a bad option when they're suffering through hours of practice they don't enjoy. Now, I know I've thrown a lot of information at you, but I don't want to overwhelm you, or even worse, make you think that kids should stop playing sports. My point tonight is that youth sports are being unnecessarily professionalized, and that it's been harmful to youth athletes, but this doesn't mean parents need to start pulling their kids out of sports. There are so many benefits to playing sports at young ages that I could go on and on. Instead, I want to leave you with the idea that some change needs to come about to reverse the professionalization of youth sports. Increasing numbers of injuries and burnout are being reported, and that's the opposite effect youth sports should have. If you were to ask me, I would say the responsibility falls on coaches. They should be reminded that the athletes they're coaching are far from professionals, and they're just kids. They're kids who don't need to be training 6 days a week and don't need to be screamed at for making mistakes. These pressures have been causing kids more injuries and higher stress levels, leading them to stop playing, and that should never be the goal of sports. Coaches should be working to make sure that kids are always having fun while they play, and nobody should ever dread attending practice or games. Playing sports throughout one's childhood can be forever beneficial, and we need to make sure this remains true.
Hi. Okay. Breast cancer is the most common type of cancer diagnosed in women, with about 317,000 new cases being diagnosed each year. It's no wonder that medicine has had to evolve rapidly to find new ways to treat it more effectively and more safely. Breast cancer is now being diagnosed earlier and treated faster. While we've gotten better at treating it, though, the actual incidence rate of breast cancer is increasing in younger women. On top of that, the treatments that have worked for so many years are proving not to be as positive for the younger demographic. We need to reevaluate how we treat breast cancer as well as when we treat it. To fully understand how far we've come in our treatment of breast cancer, we have to start at the beginning. There are records that suggest that breast cancer has been diagnosed since their ancient times. Hippocrates, who is often called the father of Western medicine, thought that breast cancer was a systemic disease, and his theory stood for nearly 2,000 years. This means that as early as 300 BCE, people knew about breast cancer, even though they certainly didn't understand it. Then, in 1757, Dr. Henry Legrand, a French surgeon, thought that the removal of the tumor could cure it. He figured that because breast cancer was a local disease with a local origin, removing the tumor would solve the problem. It wasn't until the 19th century that American surgeon William Halsted reworked Dr. Legrand's theory and performed the first radical mastectomy. This became known as the Halsted method and involved removing the entire breast, axillary nodes, and chest muscles. The problem was, this often left the woman with major disabilities. Despite this, the Halsted method became common practice for the next half a century. In 1971, the NSABP, or National Surgical Adjuvant Breast and Bowel Project, which is an organization that was founded to test the effectiveness of different anti-cancer treatments, began Protocol B4. Protocol B4 showed that a total mastectomy was just as effective as a radical mastectomy. Then, in 1976, Protocol B6 showed that adding radiation therapy to the removal of a tumor, also known as a lumpectomy, was just as effective as a mastectomy. This was a lot less harsh of a treatment, and it was a lot easier of a surgery to recover from, as can be seen by this picture. So clearly the treatment of breast cancer evolved rapidly. Once people started performing tests and clinical trials, Once people started performing tests and trials, they found less invasive and less harmful ways to treat breast cancer. The last advancement I'm going to talk about is chemotherapy, although there are many others. Another research group conducted 194 trials between the years 1985 and 2000 to test whether adding chemotherapy would improve breast cancer outcomes. And they found that it did. It could reduce mortality by breast cancer from about 20 to 38%, depending on certain factors like the age of the patient. So the fact is, breast cancer treatment has come a long way, and we're clearly a lot better at treating it now than we were in the past. Case in point, the mortality rate of breast cancer is now at an all-time low of about 2.3%. To show this, in the past, some studies show that from 1975 to the year 2019, the mortality rate of breast cancer fell 58%, which is a huge accomplishment. And some people attribute this to more effective screening practices. The percentage of women who reported having a mammogram within the past 2 years, from 1987 to the year 2000, increased from 29% to 70%. So more women are getting more mammograms. Others believe this is the miracle of modern medicine and more effective treatment of breast cancer. Either way, we're better at diagnosing and treating breast cancer, and ultimately, the mortality rate is falling. So if the mortality rate is decreasing, why do we need to reevaluate how we're treating breast cancer? It comes down to two factors: incidence rate and the average rate at which we're diagnosing it in patients. Incidence rate is a rate at which a disease or condition occurs within a population. And while the mortality rate has been decreasing, the incidence rate has been increasing, particularly in women under the age of 50. Between the year 2000 and 2016, the incidence rate increased by about 0.24% each year. After 2016, the incidence rate started by increasing by 3.76% each year. This is a big jump. So what caused this increase? Nobody's really sure, but there are some theories. Some experts think that advancements in screening techniques, as well as an increase in the number of women being tested, led to more women being diagnosed at a younger age. This would mean that the rate isn't necessarily higher, the cancer is just being diagnosed earlier than it would have been in the past. Others think there's a link between long-term oral contraceptives like birth control, although that's still kind of in the works and there's not a ton of evidence supporting it. Some people think there are environmental reasons, but the point is, nobody's really sure. What we do know is that while the patients are getting younger and younger, a lot of the treatments aren't favored because they can cause issues down the line. For example, radiation. The position someone's in when they receive radiation is really important. They want to target the rays as best they can to the affected area without hitting the surrounding organs. They used to radiate women while they lay on their backs, as can be seen in the first figure. As the women became younger, though, they realized that this was causing heart and lung issues because the heart and lungs lie under the breast. So they had to rework this treatment, and they began to lay women on their stomachs and radiate the breast from the side. They found that this would reduce heart and lung issues in the future. A change as small as asking somebody to lie on their stomach instead of on their back could be the difference between future harm or not. Another thing to take into consideration is at what stage we discover and treat breast cancer. In the past, especially the 60s and before, when screenings weren't as widespread or as accurate, breast cancer was often diagnosed in later stages. This meant treatment was required immediately. It feels okay to use harsher treatments in those cases because it's life or death. Now, though, we can catch breast cancer earlier and earlier. We can even tell someone if they're genetically predisposed to having it, and all of this is a good thing. It means that people are more aware and more cautious around cancer, but it can likely lead to overtreatment sometimes. It's scary to think about having cancer and not treating it right away, but in some situations, this might be what's best. Cancer is often diagnosed so early that it hasn't spread yet, and treating it right away could pose future benefits, but we're not sure. It also has a lot of risks associated. Recent studies show that women with low-risk, hormone-sensitive ductal carcinoma who undergo active surveillance regular monitoring through mammograms and clinical trials had similar outcomes to those who received immediate surgery. This means that some women could potentially avoid surgery without increasing their risk. And what am I trying to say here? Well, as more research comes to light, we should all try to become a little more comfortable with the idea that wait and see might be the healthiest choice for some people. But of course, at the end of the day, it's not my decision whether someone gets treatment or not. It should be the decision of the patient and the result of a conversation between said patient and their healthcare professional. With the increasing incidence rates, more studies should be done to try and determine what treatments are the most effective and when they should be implemented. If small changes can better the lives of so many women, what other changes can and should be made? I'm not saying the treatments we have should be disregarded completely or even looked down upon, but maybe they could be modified. Breast cancer is a disease that affects so many women, and we should try to make the treatment for it as low impact and as effective as possible. We can see throughout the history of breast cancer treatment that often a huge accomplishment or achievement was just a new take on an old idea. Maybe we can revamp how we currently treat women with breast cancer to make it less stressful on the body over time and make sure it really does more good than harm. Thank you.
My MedEx talk today is going to be about how our American identity is reflected through our diet. When we think about what Americans eat, it's easy to focus on the what. The trends we follow, the labels we read, the actual food on our plates. But the deeper story lies within the why. Why did TV dinners replace home-cooked meals? Why did low-fat yogurts flood the grocery stores? Why today are we seeing plant-based burgers in drive-thrus, community gardens in urban neighborhoods, and food deserts all around? Well, you may have heard the saying, you are what you eat. But what about the inverse? What if our diets are uniquely tied to our identity? What if there's a powerful intersection between culture and food? Today we're going to talk about that. Today we're going to talk about how our food reflects who we are, our values, our economy, our politics, and our shifting social norms. Today we will trace the evolution of the American diet from the 60s to today, examining how changes in general, public health, environmental awareness, and social justice have shaped our food choices. Each decade tells a story, not just what Americans put on their tables, but of how we redefine the meaning of food itself, as convenience, as identity, as resistance, and as care. As we look through the past, we may be able to find the future of America. We will begin with the 1960s and 70s, a time where tradition met transformation, and when the seeds of today's food revolution were born. In the 1960s, the American dinner table was dominated by home-cooked meals, meat, potato staples, and dairy-heavy sides. Processed foods existed, but had not yet overtaken fresh cooking. Beneath the surface, significant cultural changes were beginning. It was at this time that the feminist movement began gaining traction. More women entered the workplace, and as their roles changed at the workplace, they changed at home as well. These women didn't want to come home from work and make a meal from scratch. They wanted convenience. Hamburger helper, canned soups, anything ready-made for busy women. This was the beginning of the convenience industry and its rapid expansion. This was a time of questioning. People began to question the food industry as a whole. Organic co-ops and vegetarianism eating gained traction in progressive circles, introducing ideas that would later grow into mainstream popularity. This moment in the 1960s and 70s marks the first clear example of the idea that we introduced earlier. America doesn't just eat what it wants, it eats what it is. As gender roles shifted, traditional meal structures began to erode. As environmental consciousness grew, so did skepticism toward industrial agriculture. The rise of convenience foods and the early roots of organic activism weren't just changes in diet. They were expressions of deeper social transformation. In the 1980s, processed foods were a fixture in most American households. The average family was eating more calories overall, and much of it came from added sugars, sodium, and refined carbohydrates in ultra-processed foods. Public health messaging began to focus on fat reduction. The USDA and the American Heart Association both promoted low-fat diets to combat heart disease, leading manufacturers to reduce fat from foods and replace them with healthier options, added sugars and starches. Ironically, these would be marketed healthier, but we saw an increase in obesity as well as type 2 diabetes rates. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, civil rights activists were drawing attention to things called food deserts, places where fresh produce in grocery stores were not abundant, but yet fast food was. It was easy to get a burger, but not a salad. This period marked the start of the modern food justice movement, which connected to access to healthy food with racial and economic equity. As with earlier decades, what Americans ate mirrored broader social dynamics: a fear of fat, a trust in quick fixes, and a widening gap in food access. Once again, our diets reflected more than taste. It exposed deeper truths about public health priorities, economic inequality, and how culture shapes our most personal choices. In the 1990s, the idea that had previously been on the fringes, organic food, sustainable farming, environmental concerns, entered the mainstream. The USDA introduced a certified organic label in 1990, formalizing a growing movement driven by a distrust of pesticides, hormones, and industrial agriculture. The environmental movement expanded its critique of the meat industry, linking it to deforestation, water pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. Vegetarianism, while once niche, began to rise, particularly among young and educated consumers. As organic and sustainable food moved from the fringes to the mainstream, the 1990s showed how personal eating habits were increasingly driven by cultural values, like environmental responsibility and distrust of industrial systems. Once again, what Americans chose to eat wasn't about nutrition. It reflected changing beliefs about health, nature, and the ethics of food production. The 2000s brought a reckoning with the country's growing health crisis. Rates of obesity had doubled among adults and tripled among children since the 1970s. And over 30% of adults were now classified as obese. Public health campaigns began to focus on physical activity and nutrition. New dietary guidelines emphasized fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and lean proteins. This period also saw a rise in the modern wellness movement. Yoga, plant-based eating, superfoods, and as food as medicine philosophies took root. At the same time, the anti-diet and the body positivity movements began challenging traditional ideas of health and fitness. Movements like health at every size promoted intuitive eating and body acceptance over restriction and shame. Culturally, food became more global. The 2010s further proved that our diets are as much shaped by social values and digital culture as by hunger or habit. From climate action to influencer-driven trends, food became a tool for self-expression and activism. In the 2010s, social media changed the conversation about food. Platforms like Instagram and YouTube helped popularize diets such as keto, paleo, and intermittent fasting, which we all may have heard of. At the same time, food influencers, wellness bloggers, and wellness dietitians use their platforms to promote healthy, balanced, evidence-based approaches to nutrition. The climate crisis pushed sustainability to the forefront. Plant-based diets gained popularity, not only for health, but for environmental reasons. Brands like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods brought alternative proteins into fast food chains, while more consumers demanded transparency about where their food came from and how it was produced. The social justice elements of food reform deepened during this time, with activists connecting food access, labor rights, and racial equality. School lunch reform, community gardens, and urban farming projects were embraced as ways to address systemic disparities in food availability. The 2010s just showed how powerful culture, technology, and activism can be in shaping what we eat. And why? As food became a platform for environmental action, digital influence, and social justice, it set the stage for the future we now know. One where our choices matter more than ever. As we look to the future, several emerging trends suggest that the American diet will continue to evolve alongside shifting cultural values and social priorities. First, the focus on sustainability is likely to grow. While with climate change becoming more urgent, more Americans are expected to adopt plant-forward eating patterns, reduce food waste, and support local and regenerative agriculture. Technological innovation may also reshape what we eat. Lab-grown meats, AI-designed nutrition plans, and vertical farming are gaining momentum, offering new solutions to long-standing system food problems. Pharmaceutical tools like GLP-1s may influence how individuals manage weight and appetite, but they don't replace the need for systemic solutions, like equitable access to nutritious food, sustainable agriculture, and policies that prioritize health over profit. Culturally, the growing recognition of food as a form of identity, heritage, and empowerment will keep driving the demand for diverse, inclusive food systems. While challenges still remain for the future, the American diet still holds promise of being healthier, more sustainable, and more equitable. The social movements of today continue to reshape the decisions of tomorrow. As we've explored, the American diet is far more than a list of ingredients. It's a reflection of our evolving values, politics, identities, and the systems we live within. Every shift in our diet tells a story about who we are and what we prioritize. Looking forward, the choices we make about food will become more complex and even more critical. Climate change, economic inequality, and ongoing public health crisis all demand that we rethink how food is grown, shared, and consumed. Let's not wait for the food system to change us. Let's be the ones to change it. Whether you're a policymaker, a parent, a student, or just someone who cares about what's on your plate, you have a role to play. Think critically about convenience, and most of all, remember every food is a choice. Support your local farmers, demand transparency, and advocate for fair food policies. It's not just about what we eat, It's about the kind of future we want to create. The story of the American diet isn't finished. It's ours to write, and it starts with what we do next.
We have my food up here with me. All right, folks, if you can give Abby a warm, gigantic round of raucous applause, we'll be ready to go.
Hi everyone, I'm going to start off today by asking you all to take a moment to think about the heating and or air conditioning in your houses. I know when it's 90 degrees outside in July and I get to go to bed in my 65-degree bedroom, I sit like a baby and thank my parents for getting AC in our house all those years ago. We also all know that when these systems aren't working correctly, life can be miserable. I would imagine it's not cheap to heat a home, so you certainly don't want that heat leaking out through poorly insulated windows and doors. You can ignore the issue, but chances are that over time you'll end up spending more money on extra heat than you would have on just installing new windows. This is how GLP-1 medications, such as Ozempic or Wegovy, should be viewed. The cost of these prescriptions can be scary, much like that of new windows, which I fully understand, but in the end, they are most definitely worth the investment, and we typically even end up saving money. Even at $1,000 a shot, GLP-1 drugs should be embraced and acknowledged as one of the most cost-effective prescriptions of modern times. For a long time, funding prevention has seemed almost impossible, with people unsure of where to even start. Realistically, we can't force healthy preventative lifestyles without hindering on people's sense of independence. Strides were made in this area through passing the Affordable Care Act in 2010, which required insurance companies to cover certain preventative services such as birth control, routine vaccines, and some cancer screenings for no cost to the patient. We are all obviously able to acknowledge that a $15 pack of birth control pills is much less costly than raising a human, and that a mammogram is cheaper than a mastectomy, but human nature and anxiety can make the ideas of prevention feel controversial. It's estimated by the CDC that the 2023-2024 flu vaccine alone prevented almost 10 million flu-related illnesses and 8,000 deaths, and yet less than 50% of adults actually get the vaccine. As I'm sure you can see, we have definitely implemented some prevention, but it hasn't been easy, and we're nowhere close to done. After taking all this in, you might be asking yourselves, what is next in preventative medicine? I mean, how is it possible that we can cut and modify DNA through CRISPR technology to treat aggressive, yet somewhat rare illnesses such as sickle cell and hemophilia, but we're still struggling to explain to the public the importance of exercise and nutrition that promotes them to make changes in their own lifestyles? This is where GLP-1 prescriptions have come into play. The recent breakthrough of GLP-1 medications is allowing us, as a society, another opportunity to support and fund prevention in a way that could directly benefit over a third of American adults. The National Institute of Health released a study that severe obesity can lower life expectancy by up to 14 years. Almost 50% of adults in the United States are considered overweight, and the leading cause of death in the United States is heart disease. Studies have also shown that roughly 80% of cardiovascular disease cases are preventable by maintaining healthy weight and lifestyle, which new GLPs can significantly improve. GLP-1, or glucagon-like peptide 1, is a hormone in the small intestine with a couple dietary functions. Every healthy, functioning body already secretes GLP-1, so it's important not to think of it as a foreign chemical invading our bodies. Following a meal, GLP-1 is secreted by enteroendocrine cells that line your GI tract. It helps to lower blood sugar levels by triggering your pancreas to release a hormone called insulin, which lowers blood sugar levels by actually moving that sugar into your cells, and when your cells are full of sugar, you don't feel hungry. In addition, GLP slows the rate at which food leaves the stomach, making a person feel full for longer. It also directly reduces the release of other hunger hormones and acts on specific receptors in the brain that tells a person they are full. So as you can see, not only can GLP-1s be used to manage type 2 diabetes, they can be a super helpful agent in losing weight. Many people are intimidated and scared by the unknown, rightfully so, and I'm hoping that by having taken a minute to explain to you why these drugs work, they don't feel as foreign. As a reminder, these medications were originally introduced as a treatment for type 2 diabetes as far back as 2005 to manage blood sugar levels, until it was discovered that they can be used to help people lose weight. The FDA first approved a GLP-1 medication for weight loss, Saxenda, in 2014, and since then, others such as Wegovy and Zepbound have followed in its footsteps. We've had over 20 years of experience with these drugs, and so far they have not only proven to be effective, but also safe. While the cost for these prescriptions are high, and for example, the manufacturer list price for Ozempic is around $1,000 a month, the United States currently spends over $170 billion annually on obesity, and it's estimated that the effects and complications of obesity could cost more than $9 trillion over the next 10 years, and even up to $4 trillion annually following the trends of rising obesity rates. Several studies have also shown that lowering obesity rates by even 25% would significantly reduce healthcare costs and improve productivity in the workplace. So while taxpayers may feel cheated that their money is going towards paying for these prescriptions for others using government-funded insurance, there's plenty of data to show that the implementation of GLP-1 medications will reduce healthcare spending in the long term. The Cleveland Clinic estimates that the average hospital stay after a heart attack is around 5 days, and while living in the state of New York, you can expect the bill for that to come in at around $18,000 before any insurance. So while GLP-1s may seem costly at first, I'm hoping you'll all soon realize, if you haven't already, that they are far less expensive and dangerous as the ramifications of obesity. And if you've had a hard time adding up the billions and trillions as I've gone along, then here's a diagram to comprehensively show you the cost of obesity in comparison to other major diseases. As a society, we tend to have a lot of different opinions regarding these medications. Some people view them as a lazy way for people to feel better about their own looks without, quote, putting in the work to actually lose weight. Others think they're too expensive to be used for cosmetic purposes and a poor use of our healthcare spending. As a society, we need to be able to put our gut reactions to the side for just a second and think through the extraordinary benefit of these prescriptions. While I can acknowledge that they have possible side effects, along with all drugs on the market, such as nausea or even bowel obstructions, these side effects are much less common and severe than those of obesity. The World Health Organization estimates that there are at least 2.8 million people dying globally each year as an effect of being overweight or obese. And to put that into perspective for you guys, that's roughly the number of people who live in the state of Mississippi dying each year to obesity, which is something that we can prevent as a society by using GLP-1s when necessary to maintain healthy BMIs. GLP-1s are expected to become much more available as orforglipron, the once-daily GLP-1 pill, is expected to seek approval from the FDA in early 2026. This drug seemed to be very effective in trials that were run, with patients losing an average of 16 pounds after taking the highest dose, which is similar to the average weight loss while using Ozempic for 40 weeks in other trials. So not only have scientists discovered an effective way to save lives by lowering obesity rates, they have now found a way to make it just as accessible as common maintenance medications. A price has not yet been set for this once-daily pill, but in general, pills are much cheaper to produce than injectables, so there is hope that this life-saving treatment can become much more readily available in the upcoming months and years. After hearing all of this, hopefully you're able to appreciate all the possibilities available with glucagon-like peptide-1 drugs. And remember, the next time you're spending insane amounts of money to heat your house, all because you were unable to put the time and money in to fix the initial problem with the leaky windows, that you don't ever want to put your body in the same situation. Thank you.
%40 of deaths in the United States are due to smoking or obesity. Almost half of the United States population is obese, and among first world countries, the United States has the most obese people. Now, smoking and obesity have something in common. They are both preventable diseases. Such a simple idea, but one that could change the entire United States healthcare system. Our healthcare system has been designed so that in most cases we treat diseases, not prevent them, and this needs to change. To really understand what this entails, we need to get a better understanding of preventative medicine. Preventative medicine is the practice of promoting preventative healthcare with the ultimate goal of preventing disease, disability, and death. This typically includes screenings for heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and also vaccinations. All of this is a great start to applying preventative medicine in our healthcare system, but we need to do considerably more to make an actual difference. Let's switch gears and go more in depth about our healthcare. I have a question for you guys all to answer, so please just raise your hand. How much does everyone think that we spent on healthcare last year? So, who thinks that we spent $500 million on healthcare last year? Good choice. Who thinks we spent $1 billion on healthcare last year? Who thinks we spent $500 billion on healthcare last year? Who thinks we spent $1 trillion on healthcare last year? Thank you all for voting, but sadly, all these answers are wrong. The United States spent $5 trillion on healthcare last year, which was the highest amount of money spent on healthcare out of any country in the world. So if we're spending so much money on healthcare, then we must be getting good results from it, right? Well, for those of us who said yes in our heads, sadly, we're wrong again. Not only does the United States have the lowest life expectancy among high-income countries, but we also have the highest rate of avoidable deaths. Avoidable mortality refers to deaths that are preventable and treatable. Treatable mortality can be avoided mainly through timely and effective healthcare interventions, including regular exams, screenings, and treatment. The United States had about 300 avoidable deaths per 100,000 people in 2020. The next closest country, which really wasn't close, was the United Kingdom, which had about 200 avoidable deaths per 100,000 people. The United States life expectancy is 77 years. That is lower than the United Kingdom's, Norway's, Sweden's, Australia's, Canada's, France's, Germany's, and Japan's life expectancies, which are all above 80. In a study conducted by the Commonwealth Fund, the United States ranked last out of 11 countries in healthcare efficiency due to the poor performance of national healthcare expenditures and administrative costs, as well as measures such as administrative hassles, avoidable emergency room use, and duplicative medical tests. The United States also ranked last in the Healthy Lives category, as the United States had overall poor scores on all three indicators of healthy lives, which were mortality amenable to medical care, infant mortality, and healthy life expectancy at age 60. Notably, there is one consistent difference between the United States and these other countries. All of the other countries have universal health care, and the United States does not. Universal health care is where everyone is on the same single-payer public health care plan for life, though in some systems, people can choose to change to private providers, but then they are also stuck on that system for their lives. Not having a single entity pay for a person's health care for his or her entire life is the biggest challenge to developing better preventative care in the United States. In our healthcare system, insurers are not incentivized to pay for people's preventative health care because they are not sure how long that person will be on their plan. If an insurer is not sure how long that person will be on their plan, they will logically be less likely to want to pay for someone's preventative health care, even if it stopped a person from later having a disease that requires a lot of treatment and money, like cancer. It makes sense for an insurer to invest $1,000 now to prevent me from needing $10,000 in care later, but only if they are confident I will actually be in their care later. And the chances are I will not be. Most United States health insurance is tied to employment, and people usually change employers every 2 to 3 years. Spending $1,000 today seems like a much worse investment if I will no longer have their policy 3 years from now. As much as I personally want to see a one-payer healthcare system, this likely won't happen for a long time, if ever. So it's useful to think that what we do well in our current system and what the current system can also do better. With the current system we have now, here's what we do exceptionally well. We have done a lot better with controlling and preventing smoking. Smoking rates have been on a decline for centuries now. In 1954, 45% of the United States population smoked. And now, in 2018, only 18% of Americans say that they have smoked. Another aspect of healthcare that the United States has done exceptionally well is combating heart disease. Heart disease is still the #1 cause of death in the United States. However, the rates of heart disease have gone down significantly. This is mostly due to blood pressure medicine and screenings, which have been seen to combat and prevent heart disease. Since 1960, cardiovascular disease in the United States has declined 60%. The number of people who died from heart disease has gone from 1 in 2 in 1950 to now 1 in 9. These successful campaigns give us a template for how to do prevention well at the national scale, where we still have great strides to make, such as type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, and vaccination compliance. There are other areas we can address to improve on prevention. One of the most important areas we can improve on is primary care. 33% of Americans, which is equivalent to 100 million people, say that they do not have primary care physicians. It is shown that people with primary care providers are genuinely more healthy than people who do not. This is because they are able to ensure good preventative health care and help coordinating with other healthcare providers. Many Americans also live far away from providers, which makes healthcare hard to reach, and they use that as an excuse not to see a healthcare provider. We have started to address this by giving loans and scholarships for primary care students who have a service commitment after medical school. There is also loan repayment assistance for medical students who end up going into careers that are underserved in the medical field, like primary care. The Commonwealth Fund also suggests that expanding value-based payment programs where primary care physicians are paid based on patient outcomes and not hourly, patients seen hourly. The Commonwealth Fund, where primary care physicians are paid based on patient outcomes, could be another way to attract more primary care physicians and stop the PCP shortage. Even though I think the best way to improve our preventative care in our nation is to adopt a universal healthcare system, there is still hope for the system we have today. We must continue our public health care campaigns and do all that we can to increase access to primary care. People can still have healthier lives, and the United States can still make smaller changes in the system that can make a change for the better. The United States can also leverage the success in heart disease and obesity to improve in similar areas like diabetes, vaccines, and long-term neurological illnesses like Alzheimer's. Americans deserve a system not just to get well, but to stay healthy. Thank you.
Picture this. You're about to leave the house for the dreaded 9 to 5, but you're waiting in the sole thing that powers your day to finish brewing, the cup of coffee. Now, if everyone could raise their hand if they've had any amount of caffeine today. What about 2 cups of coffee or an energy drink? So we've all had some caffeine today, many of us more than 190 milligrams, which, believe it or not, is only half of the recommended maximum amount per day, according to the Mayo Clinic. What if I told you that some of us have already gone over the limit of what we should consume, and that everyone has their own caffeine speed limit? Let's talk about what happens after you take that first sip of caffeine. As we know, it's a chemical stimulant that makes us feel more energized and awake. But as we go deeper into the breakdown of caffeine, we realize it is much more than just a feeling of energy. Caffeine is rapidly and completely absorbed within the hour following ingestion. It is distributed throughout fluids in our body and readily crosses cell membranes. It even crosses into the brain, which some substances most cannot do. There are 3 different mechanisms in which caffeine works within the body. 1, it blocks the feeling of fatigue. 2, it triggers the release of adrenaline. 3, it causes the muscles to contract more strongly. But let's break this down even further. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors on cells. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter that naturally accumulates when we are awake. As the amount goes up, it tells our bodies that we need sleep. By blocking the adenosine receptors, caffeine tells us to stay awake. Blocking those receptors also gives us a mild sense of euphoria, leading to a tiny boost of endorphins. It's important to know that when adenosine receptors on cells that are specifically in the brain, or are blocked on cells specifically in the brain, this causes blood vessels in the brain to constrict. 2, it stimulates the adrenal gland to release adrenaline, which is important in the breakdown of triglycerides. So instead of carbohydrates being used for fueling, fats are being used. This allows our surplus of glycogen, a form of carbohydrate energy, to be stored in the muscles for fueling at later times, keeping us going for longer. It also amps up the body in the same way that any burst of adrenaline would. You know the feeling. 3, calcium release is also stimulated by caffeine, and this helps with muscle contraction. You may also remember that the heart is a muscle, so the effects of the stimulant are now felt there as well. There are a few ways that caffeine affects our body, specifically through increasing a tiny but important molecule called cyclic AMP. It's a fairly complex process, but ends up with the same result. We are amped up and awake. Considering caffeine is the most widely consumed psychoactive drug, it should come with warnings on how much each individual person has their own limit and effects of regularly consuming it, right? Wrong. But it does come with some common knowledge that you shouldn't drink a lot of caffeine while pregnant or that too much can affect our sleep. But what most of us don't know is that caffeine can cause gastric acid secretion and cause elevated levels of digestion hormones. This can give us the empty stomach feeling after ingesting caffeine. It can also increase the risk or symptoms of acid reflux by causing a lower esophageal sphincter to relax, which can allow stomach acid to backflow into the esophagus. It should also be no surprise that studies have shown that caffeine can increase the feeling of irritability. Also, it is true that headaches are associated with withdrawal of the drug. Remember that caffeine can cause blood vessels in the brain to constrict. This is very helpful in fighting against certain types of headaches, and caffeine is commonly found in some medicines such as Excedrin or Midol. But if the body gets used to having caffeine all the time, suddenly reducing caffeine can cause headaches. Withdrawal symptoms can vary person to person and are linked to the levels of tolerance that any one person has. One of the biggest negative effects is the potential for a caffeine overdose. Symptoms vary between amounts that are taken in. For example, mild toxicity, which is between 400 and 600 milligrams, can look like jitters, anxiety, nausea, insomnia, headaches, and increased heart rate. But moderate toxicity, which is between 600 and 1,000 milligrams, can look like vomiting, muscle tremors, heart palpitations, confusions, and panic attacks. And severe toxicity, which is rare but can occur, is over 1,000 milligrams. And symptoms are seizures, cardiac arrhythmia, very high blood pressure, loss of consciousness, and in extreme cases, death. Death is incredibly rare, with maybe 50 cases per year globally. But ED trips for caffeine overuse are on the rise, with 13 out of 100,000 visits from a teen each year being related to caffeine. While the negative effects of caffeine should be present in our minds when deciding how much to consume, the positive effects should also weigh into that decision. As we know, it increases attention and alertness through receptors in the brain, and it can enhance endurance during physical activity, which is why many athletes use caffeine as a source of fuel before participating in sports. It increases endorphins, which gives a feeling of the exercise high that is experienced when working out. The glycogen that is spared by caffeine causes fat to be broken down instead of carbs, so carbs can be saved for later, allowing us to go for longer. Most athletes use small amounts of caffeine before performance to increase focus and energy. And when it comes down to knowing when to choose between drinking more caffeine or drinking less, we should always choose based upon our own experience with our ability to handle caffeine. So how do we figure out what the caffeine speed limit is? There are many factors at play, including the physiology of a person, genetic factors, health status, and life choices. So let's talk about the physiology and how this affects our tolerance. Different levels of caffeine can be metabolized more quickly in one person than another. Like we've seen a man who drinks 2 cups of coffee and can break it down in around 5 hours because he has a higher muscle mass, which causes liver enzymes to process faster, versus a woman who will metabolize it in around 6 hours due to high estrogen levels, which inhibit liver enzymes from breaking it down at a steady rate. Body weight can also have effects as well. If someone has a higher body weight, it may reduce caffeine's impact, so more can be consumed to have the same effect. Muscle mass also plays a role in tolerance, so leaner individuals can metabolize caffeine faster. With all this in mind, there is one last major thing that affects us all: age. Older adults can have prolonged effects due to slower metabolism and may need to consume less than someone who is younger and can consume more. Genetics may be a little less obvious. We are predisposed by our genes and the proteins they tell our bodies to make. Researchers have identified 2 distinct genes that can affect our individual caffeine speed limit. One gene influences how quickly someone can metabolize or break down caffeine, and the other affects how sensitive cell receptors are to caffeine uptake. It would not be surprising if scientists continue to find more genetic factors as research continues. Our general health status is, again, a bit easier to observe, if not necessarily easier to control. For instance, if a woman was pregnant, the amount of caffeine that would be able to be consumed may be less than an average individual. Another example is the regular use of it. This can cause a person to have reduced stimulant effects and may require higher dosages. High blood pressure can also have a huge impact on how we process caffeine and how much is able to be tolerated. So as you see, health not only drives our choices between too much or too little caffeine, but oftentimes affects it too. Finally, we all make life choices which can play a fairly significant role, such as what foods we eat. If we are eating high-fat meals all the time, this can slow caffeine absorption, which can make us want to drink more to feel the effects. Or where we choose to get our caffeine from, coffee versus energy drinks. They have different absorption rates and effects. Energy drinks are often absorbed faster and the effects are felt quicker, which is why it is the most reached for source of caffeine in younger adults. As we've seen, caffeine feels differently to everyone. While it can be a helpful aid in our daily routines, it's crucial to understand and respect its limits. By being mindful of our intake and recognizing when it's time to cut back, we can enjoy the benefits of caffeine without being a victim of potential drawbacks. So it seems to be clear that we all need to find our own caffeine speed limit.
One morning, my friend woke up late, and it was the day our final paper for English was due. And with her in a rush, she grabbed her backpack and headed out the door. As she was on her way, her mom texted her to tell her she forgot her paper on the counter. Looking down at her phone for only a split second, she looked back up, and before she knew it, she rear-ended the car in front of her. Thankfully, she wasn't badly injured, but she did have a few scratches and bruises. She thought it would be a quick visit to the ER, maybe just taking a few hours, but in reality it wasn't. She waited 3 hours in the hallway before getting moved into a real patient room. An hour later, a nurse finally came in to check her vitals and to make sure she was comfortable. The nurse was barely awake, was mixing up the orders for the patients, and seemed very rushed. What was supposed to be a short visit stretched to be almost 36 hours long. only for the ED to tell her that nothing was wrong. The sight of overburdened staff, the long wait hours, and the lack of attention shouldn't be what we expect to see and experience in the hospital. There are ways to address this, and one that is of particular interest to me, as someone who has an interest in nursing, is that if we work to remodel the profession of nursing, it can help diminish burnout. Burnout is more than just feeling tired. It's a state of physical and emotional exhaustion caused by prolonged or excessive stress. The truth to this is nobody is immune to it. Teachers, lawyers, hairstylists, even construction workers can feel a sense of it. In healthcare, especially among nurses, burnout has become a crisis that needs to be addressed. In 2020, 62% of nurses reported that they experienced or were experiencing a state of burnout. Along with that, another study by the National Library of Medicine showed 91% of nurses reported high levels of burnout. Nurses also reported low levels of job satisfaction compared to their counterparts. When patients recognize signs of burnout, it can cause the foundation between patient and provider to erode. Patients on units in which experience high levels of burnout reported feeling less empathy and attentiveness from their caregivers, leading to a strain in nurse and patient relationships. That is over half of our nurses that felt a physical or emotional state of exhaustion. Their days are mostly filled with a type of repetition, administrative burdens, long shifts, high patient loads, and emotional investment. This can start to feel endless. When a nurse is burned out, it's hard to feel connected to work, hard to feel the spark that brought him or her into the profession in the first place. They care for the patients and their needs, but still feel exhausted. Nursing is about something bigger. It's about meeting the needs in their most vulnerable moments. When nurses burn out, it doesn't just affect them, it affects the entire system. A systematic study by Lambert-Zixon found that nurse burnout is consistent with negative organizational outcomes that were reduced, such as patient safety, the quality of care received, satisfaction rates, and the nurse's own productivity. The findings show how nurses play a critical role in delivering a standard of care for patients. Also, how nurses help maintain efficiency in our healthcare system. When in a hospital, the first person we are normally assessed by is a nurse. Nurses are often the first point of contact and the ones providing the bulk of one-on-one care. Setting up medical equipment, managing bedside needs, and being there for you throughout your stay. During a nursing shortage, there are just a few nurses trying to accomplish all these tasks while also trying to care for dozens of patients. In the U.S., the average nurse-to-patient ratio varies. The ratio of patients to nurses in a hospital typically averages from 1 or 2 patients for one nurse in critical areas, with ratios of 4 or 5 patients to nurse in areas where patients are more stable. In some units, it can be 1 nurse per 2 patients or 1 nurse per 5 patients. This can seem reasonable, but what it can end up turning into is 1 nurse per 12 patients. At this level, providing quality care would be impossible for most. Managing multiple patients with complex needs can be one of the most challenging aspects of the job, and trying to meet everyone's needs simultaneously can end up being very exhausting. In fact, a 2020 study by Leslie Kelly concluded that on a measure of emotional exhaustion, each unit of increase raised the likelihood of a nurse leaving their profession by 12%. The reality of this is painful to watch unfold, but it can be prevented. For example, in Arizona, there are only 7 nurses per 1,000 people, and in South Dakota, there are 15. This is a huge difference when it comes to the availability of nurses to be hired. It should be no surprise that Arizona is experiencing one of the highest levels of burnout in the country. Dr. Linda Inken found that each additional patient that was given to a nurse increased the risk of them experiencing burnout by 23%. As their patient load grows, the care they can offer diminishes, leaving them feeling drained and overworked by the end of each day. Thankfully, there's another side that unfolds with this reality too. Burnout can also cause a spark. It can raise awareness about systematic issues, fuel a deeper determination to improve the working conditions, and remind us that despite the lows given, it's rewarding and meaningful. As this is what we want to experience instead of burnout, We have to come up with solutions to help diminish it. Allowing nurses to have a flexible schedule can allow for an improvement of work-life balance. Having nurses be involved in decision-making policies and administration problems helps them enhance their job satisfaction and a feeling of sense of control, leading to a creation of a support system that nurses can lean on. It has been shown in a study by the University of Virginia that nurses in hospitals with supportive environments report 20% less time in a state of burnout during their employment. Creating a healthier, more supportive work environment for our nurses isn't just helpful, it's an essential. Their voices and ideas bring hope, not just for their own well-being, but for the future of healthcare as a whole. Thank you.
Okay. I don't think I got that.
All right, folks, I promise you the last third is just as good as the first 2/3. So please join me in very, very warmly welcoming our next student to the stage.
Your mic is off.
Thank you. Are about to start their academic journey into healthcare. Sports teaches us so much more beyond just physical skills. They are in part what will make many of us successful healthcare providers. Along with that, our healthcare system could be so much stronger if we encourage more athletes to join the medical field. Athletes can obtain many traits that are very useful in healthcare. Some of these traits include mental toughness, focus, self-confidence, teamwork, leadership, communication, accepting of criticism, and so much more. Let's take a brief look into the daily schedule of a high school varsity athlete, Isla. Isla wakes up at around 6 o'clock. She has a light breakfast, prepares for her day. Around 6:30, she has a brief morning workout, gets some stretching in, something to move her body. Around 7:30, she finishes getting ready and she commutes to school. She has her typical school day from 8 to 3. She goes to her classes, has lunch around noon. After school, she heads home, grabs a snack, and changes before she heads off to lacrosse practice. She has practice from 3:30 to 5:30. After, she comes home, showers, and then usually has dinner with her family around 6:30. After dinner with her family, she dedicates her time from 7 to 9 to getting all her homework done and studying. Once her homework's done, she gets ready for bed, has some time to call a friend, and then by 10 o'clock, she hopes to be in bed. However, not always as easy as it seems, as she falls asleep thinking about her lacrosse tournament in Rochester. Pretty busy, long day, wouldn't you say? Here we can see why it's crucial for student athletes like Isla to have good time management skills. Sports often take a decent amount of commitment, and they require an athlete to play about 6 times a week, whether it's for practice, a lifting workout, or a game or a meet. Along with this, they must balance a social life, family, school, and sometimes even a part-time weekend job. This allows for little time to dilly-dally and is why it's crucial for students to make the most of their time. Flash forward a few years, Isla may be in medical school. And although she'll no longer be the varsity athlete she once was, I'm sure it will hold a special place in her heart. Let's say it's Isla's second year of medical school. She's preparing for one of her first big tests. She looks around and notices some of her peers struggling to keep up with all the coursework and studying. She's confused why they didn't learn to better manage their time, but it gives her a slight boost in confidence because she can do it so well. It has been hypothesized that in school, many athletes outperform their non-athletic counterparts in part due to their better time management skills. In 2015, a study was conducted to examine the correlation between participation in a varsity sport during undergraduate and performance in medical school. 16% of the students had participated in a varsity sport during undergraduate for at least 1 year. The study examined numerous exams that medical students take, including MCAT, Step 1 and Step 2 CK, and NB-ME exam. The study also examined cumulative third-year performance and Alpha Omega Alpha, or AOA status, which is a prestigious medical honor society. The study found that athletes outperformed their non-athletic counterparts in all exams with the exception of the MCAT, in which there was no significant difference. They also found that there was a greater amount of athletes inducted into the AOA. The author attributed part of the success due to athletes developing better time management skills during their undergraduate, which better prepared them for the rigor of the coursework that awaited them in medical school. Of course, these time management skills that can be developed from student athletes are very beneficial in a professional setting as well. If Isla decides to become a nurse, this time management skills will certainly help her with her schooling and her tests. However, they'll also be beneficial in her career. Someone with better time management skills should have an advantage when it comes to monitoring, charting, and giving medications to all of his or her patients in a more timely manner. And of course, this all occurs in a high-stakes, highly emotionally charged environment, a situation in which athletes are well prepared for as well. Mental toughness and focus are crucial for athletes and healthcare providers alike. Key aspects of this include working well under pressure, bouncing back from failure, and pushing through painful and rough times. Being a part of a team can put a lot of pressure on an athlete. At times, it can feel like there's hundreds of eyes watching you, relying on you to help your team to success. This can be quite daunting at times. However, it's very important to learn and practice performing under pressure. This is especially vital in healthcare, as providers often have the health and lives of many patients in their hands. Imagine, it is the last quarter of the sectionals lacrosse game. There are 15 seconds left on the clock. Isla is running up the field with the ball. The score? 13-14. Her team needs this goal to stay in the game. Isla is running up the field as she dodges the last defender. It's between her and the goalie. The pressure begins to set in. She feels unstable and slightly shaky. She takes the shot. The goalie makes a save. Isla's team has lost their sectional lacrosse game. Being in these situations over and over again allow athletes like Isla to get good practice at performing under pressure. But they also teach us to learn to overcome failure. Every time two teams step on the field, half the players are destined to fail. Yet those very players have to learn to get back on the field the very next day. Athletes experience what it's like to fail. We all fail. However, it's how we handle it and move on. Resilience is critical in any field, but especially in a field like healthcare, where the stakes are high and the emotional toll can be heavy. A few months after the sectional game, our resilient athlete is back at it again. This time, it's the 5th minute of overtime. Isla is running off only 4 hours of sleep due to her hectic schedule, and she's already been running around the field for 2 hours. Isla, however, has been training for this moment. She's been well fueled by her diet. She's been to every extra lifting workout. Isla's teammate is running up the field with the ball. Defenders begin to swarm around her. Isla's just a few yards away. Isla's teammate makes a pass. Isla catches it. It's between Isla and the goalie once again. The pressure sets in. Isla takes a shot. She scores. Her team has won their game as teammates swarm around Isla in excitement. The last few minutes of a game are arguably the toughest. Muscles begin to fatigue, tiredness builds up, and the pressure grows. Being able to withstand exhaustion is as much mental as it is physical strength. Imagine you are Isla. You decide to go for a run to get extra training in. You know, at the beginning, you probably feel pretty good. You know, you're getting physical activity, you're outside. But as the run tends to go on, you begin to feel tired, you might be in pain, you're breathing pretty heavily, it's uncomfortable. So why does one decide to keep running? Why put ourselves in these uncomfortable situations? It's the outcomes to our actions and the goals we have for ourselves that allow us to keep going. When we want to become better at something, it gives us a reason or purpose to put ourselves in these uncomfortable situations. While it takes physical strength to push our bodies, it also takes mental strength for us to not give up. In the healthcare field, professionals often work long, demanding shifts that can take a lot out of a person. But once again, it is our mental strength that can keep us moving. Many athletes have a lot of experience with feeling exhausted and handling it, which is very beneficial in healthcare. Let's flash forward a few years when Isla may be a nurse. She would be working 3 12-hour night shifts, usually right in a row. It's her third night, 11th hour of her shift. The end is in sight, but exhaustion is at an all-time high. She is working on the PCU floor, and she must help transfer an incoming patient. All she can think about is just going home. But she takes a moment, and she thinks about why she chose nursing. She remembers how she wanted to make a difference in people's lives and be able to care for and support for her patients. It's been a long day on her feet, constantly racing around, but she does it. She helps transfer this patient, and she feels a slight bit more accomplished. Although there hasn't yet been targeted research to show that exhausted residents or overworked nurses who were once athletes perform better than non-athletes, there has been research showing that athletes are more resilient to physical exhaustion and have better cognitive skills than others when under pain or under physical stress. As we can see, many skills of athletes and healthcare providers overlap quite a bit. If healthcare workers already have these skills under their belt, they can have a jump start and provide better care. I do not mean to discredit any healthcare professionals who were not athletes before. However, I feel as though having a history of sports can be very beneficial and can even give athletes a bit of an advantage. So I would like to thank my mom and dad for signing me up for a swim team in kindergarten and for buying me my first lacrosse stick when I was in 3rd grade. And to all the parents, sports parents out there who probably thought they were signing their kid up for some fun and fitness, little did you know you were preparing your kid for the medical field that awaited them. Thank you.
Women who lived a successful, meaningful life. She graduated high school in 1978 and attended college to become a real estate agent. In the subsequent years, she got a real estate license, and in 1987, she married Tom McClintock. Together, the two of them would have two beautiful children, Sana and Justin. They would stay married for 34 years, but why only 34? Well, in 2021, Lori died. For American standards, Lori's death was premature at only 61. So what caused her early death? That would be gastroenteritis, an infection and inflammation of the GI tract. But something actually needs to infect the GI tract to cause gastroenteritis. For Lori, this infector was the dietary supplement white mulberry leaf. So pretty much, Lori accidentally killed herself. You're probably thinking, how does something potent enough to cause deadly gastroenteritis get onto the market? And aren't all drugs tested before they're set out? How is it marketed to help with diabetes and weight loss? And I would say you're right. Drugs are tested before they're released, but Lori wasn't taking a drug. She was taking a dietary supplement. which are not tested. Let me explain with a simple analogy. So pretty much, imagine the pharmaceutical industry as the modern-day police department. When there's a suspicion, the police inspect it. They have researchers and detectives looking into anything that seems bad. If they find any problems, they're dealt with quickly and corrected. The police department is always active and vigilant to protect the good of the people. That is like the modern-day pharmaceutical industry. There are constant quality checks and inspections on drugs before and after they're released. This is to ensure that what is on the market is safe and tested. Now, imagine the supplement industry as the Wild West. Outlaws run rampant, and there's only one small sheriff's department to try to stop the outlaws. The sheriffs are maybe able to catch one outlaw, but for every outlaw they catch, 5 more get away. The sheriffs lack the ability to catch the outlaws, and the outlaws seem to always find a loophole to escape through. This is just like the modern-day supplement industry, but instead of outlaws and sheriffs, you have shady supplement brands in the FDA. The supplement industry is an industry built on bad regulation, misinformation, with little hope of improving in the future, and it's putting America's health at risk. But before we look deeper into the problems with the supplement industry, we need to first know what the FDA actually considers a dietary supplement. The FDA defines a dietary supplement as a product that is taken orally that contains vitamins, herbs, minerals, etc., in order to supplement the diet. Like I said before, drugs are carefully tested and looked over before they're released, but supplements are not. Why is that? This is because under the DSHEA of 1994, or the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act, supplements are considered foods and not drugs. So, by law, the regulation required to release a supplement into the market is severely decreased. With such a massive push towards supplements in the last 20 years, more and more Americans are taking them. More than 150 million people, which is about half our population, take supplements, with 79% of those people taking supplements every day. With this many Americans taking supplements, you would assume that the FDA should be increasing their regulation over the industry, but you'd be wrong. There is pretty much little hope for an increased regulation, and here's why. Firstly, like I said, supplements are considered foods and not drugs. This little change in definition allows brands to greatly reduce the oversight and safety checks required to put a supplement on the shelves. For example, brands do not need to prove safety, efficacy, or even quality of a supplement before it's on the shelf unless it contains a new ingredient. And even if a supplement does contain a new ingredient, the testing phase is limited. And brands are allowed to provide their own information on the supplement. Second, there is pretty strong industry lobbying against the regulation of the industry. Since laws concerned about the current regulation have been in effect since 1994, any change to be made after that point always faces backlash from the industry. In 2022, Senator Richard Durbin wanted to increase regulation or wanted to make product listings mandatory with the FDA. In response to this, the NPA, Natural Products Association, and the CRN, Council for Responsible Nutrition, ran aggressive campaigns against the legislation and succeeded in getting the bill killed. Corporations representing supplements like the NPA and CRN are able to use lack of public knowledge on supplements to fight regulatory bills by saying things like, this bill will limit the public's access to help, which is honestly ironic because an increase in regulation would actually increase public health. One of the main reasons that regulation won't be increasing is because people are just not educated. 77% of Americans believe that supplements are safe and effective without knowing that they are not reviewed and not tested before release. Most Americans think that since supplements are sold on the shelf near drugs and pharmacies, they have to be as safe as drugs, and that's just not correct. Finally, politicians are not willing to fight against the supplement industry in fear of public backlash. They might come off as public health or anti-public health, anti-small business, and even reforms like kind of small, like requiring manufacturers to register products with the FDA have been stalled for over a decade, despite bipartisan recognition that the market is dangerous and underregulated. Like previously stated, the supplement industry is an industry built on bad regulation and misinformation with little hope of improving in the future. And it's putting America's health at risk. But little hope does not mean zero hope. The people of the U.S. can and should avoid harmful supplements and see through the misinformation provided to the public. Because maybe it's not as hopeless as it seems. Here's what needs to be done in order to create a safer America. Firstly, the GRAS loophole needs to be closed by the FDA. The GRAS loophole is a generally recognized as safe loophole. It allows companies to skip pre-approval of new ingredients without notifying the FDA. This means that brands can add untested or novel ingredients without FDA approval. Second, we need mandatory product listing. We need that bill to be put into place. As of now, there are no actual records of what supplements are on the market. It makes it almost impossible to track harmful and dangerous products and to enforce recall. Even though lobbyists can try to kill the bill before it's passed, grassroots campaigns can also lobby politicians, leading to its eventual passage. Although many Americans believe that all supplements are 100% trustworthy, there are a few that don't, and that's actually really good. What we need is media scrutiny, influencer exposés, and consumer watchdog investigations, which can help increase demand for reform in the industry. Also, having people on social media who are aware of the problems in the industry means that there's hope to educate more people. Most importantly, having a large group of people against supplements can cause politicians to prioritize health and transparency. Grassroots campaigns work. From civil rights to environmental regulations, individual people who group together for a worthy cause can and do succeed. It might seem impossible, but one individual person can make a difference. First, the individual should try to educate others. Like I've said, many Americans take supplements, but not many know that it's dangerous. So by educating others, public concern can slowly be raised. Finally, the individual should support better laws that aim to increase regulation and politicians that aim to do the same. But why is this all important? Why should we even care about the supplement industry in the first place? We should care because so many Americans don't. So many Americans believe that supplements are the pure and clean way to solve all their problems, and that's a dangerous road for them to follow. There may be some safe and effective supplements out there, but at this point in time, it's pretty hard, nearly impossible to discern which of those might be. Until we can, each of us should take the time to think about what we're buying and also try to educate others about the lack of regulation so that a safer America is possible. We deserve a supplement industry that is not an industry built on bad regulation and misinformation, but until then, buyers should beware.
Birth control, a medication so famous, it isn't just a pill, but has practically trademarked the name of the pill. This contraceptive has been the key to reproductive freedom and bodily autonomy to millions of women worldwide and continues to be a key part in long-term relationships. I'm assuming about every woman in this room has been on or will be on birth control at some point in time in their lives. Studies show that 80% of women will use this contraceptive, but over 1/3 will experience negative side effects, some of which impact quality of life. Why must the job of preventing pregnancy long-term always fall on the woman in a partnership? We all know that condoms exist, but they have their drawbacks. They can break, they can expire, and they're often not really preferred in long-term relationships. I don't want to make any of the men out there feel dismissed, but women really are the powerhouses of reproduction. Yes, it takes two to make a child, but the woman carries the child, births it, and often nurses it. Women sacrifice their entire body to create and care for another human being. So why must they also alter their body's chemistry to prevent pregnancies or risk the ineffectiveness of condoms? Men need to have options in long-term birth control to lessen the burden that women have always shouldered. I think birth control should exist for men, and I'm going to tell you why. But first, a little history lesson. It's currently 2025, and the pill was put onto the market in 1960. Completely revolutionizing family planning and the prevention of unwanted pregnancies. Prior to the 60s, birth control was interesting, to say the least. Condoms were made of animal bladders, silk, and linen. Early spermicides included crocodile dung, honey, and rock salt. And some women used sponges soaked in cedar oil or vinegar to prevent unwanted pregnancies. Now, if those don't really set the mood for you, have fun feeding your 12 children. But if that isn't your cup of tea either, then weird and likely dangerous contraceptives were your only way to go.
Now that we're all feeling grateful to be living in a time of hygiene and plastic, let's take a moment to appreciate that the pill is really awesome, though it may be a bit outdated. If the pill can be used to alter a woman's 28 to 30-day hormonal cycle, it would seem that men's birth control could come at less of a cost. However, the cycles of men and women are very different, and I'm going to talk about the women's cycle first. 4 phases take place over the course of the month: the luteal phase, the follicular phase, ovulation, and menstruation. Women in the audience, you know that we feel very different during these phases of the month, which is why our cycle is so delicate and important to being a woman. Men, while simpler hormonally, still face complex considerations. Men have a 24-hour cycle in which testosterone is highest in the morning, peaking around midday, before slowly tapering off into the afternoon. So it just seems like a quick fix, right, to mess with their cycle instead of ours. But the drawback is in the numbers. The pill for women is designed to stop 1 little egg each month, whereas men create up to 300 million sperm cells per day. These numbers do not mean it's impossible to create birth control for men, though it's very important to note, as it may explain the delays in creation and testing, and why we have yet to see it on the market. In addition to the physiology of the men's reproductive system, researchers have noted concern of market demand, assuming that many would not buy the product nor trust its effectiveness. Between the physiology of the men's reproductive system and the lack of funding for research in men's birth control, we have yet to see it on the market, but that could still change. One great incentive for that change would be a reduction in abortion rates. During this turbulent time in our world, birth control is beyond vital. Currently, 12 states in our country have banned abortions, and although many women take the pill daily, mistakes still happen, often dropping its effectiveness to around 93%. But what about that 7%? In a state where abortions are illegal, that 7% could be detrimental. And that just can't be risked in a time when women's bodily rights are being debated at political rallies. But what if that gap could be closed? Men's birth control would not only give women the option to get off the pill, but could be used in tandem with it. We need to work with this system, not against it. And most women who go to get an abortion did not intend to go get pregnant in the first place. So let's make it harder for this to happen and protect the women in our lives from this experience. Birth control for men is closer than you may think. A clinical trial funded by the National Institutes of Health is currently underway, testing a reversible hormonal gel that is rubbed onto the shoulders daily. This gel works similar to women's birth control by using a progestin called nesterone, which works on the testes by suppressing sperm production. During this process, men naturally lose testosterone, but researchers already thought of this, so they added it back to the gel to reduce side effects. So far, participants taking part in this study have only experienced the side effect of increased libido, though others, such as weight loss and hair growth, are also possibilities. In comparison to the side effects of the pill, these are relatively inconsequential. While rare, the pill could increase a woman's risk of heart attack, blood clots, and stroke. And other more common side effects include nausea, weight gain, mood swings, and headaches. So why has it taken so long for a pill to be made for men when so many women cannot tolerate the side effects of their contraceptives? Well, statistics are showing a major problem in funding for research of male and female contraceptives. Women's hormonal birth controls receive around $700 million of funding yearly, whereas men's only receives $5 million. Now, this difference is large, and it explains why we have yet to see it in the market on the shelves for men's birth control. Another thing to note is that when we're looking at the costs of contraceptives between men and women, the difference is stark. Women bear most of the financial responsibility for their contraceptives, with the only major cost to men being a vasectomy, which many do not get. If more research was put into men's birth control, this gap could be closed, and the costs would look more equal. Men's birth control, though long overdue, is exciting, with less side effects, effective suppression of sperm, and the gift of shared responsibility in family planning. Male birth control is not just a fantasy. It's on the horizon. It's effective, relatively low risk, and offers something we've never truly had before: shared reproductive responsibility. Male birth control is more important and closer than you may think. And maybe, just maybe, women will finally be the ones to ask, are you on the pill? Thank you.
We're a senior at Able Park High School. Let's say you wake up one morning and you notice a dark brown, almost black patch on your neck that you haven't noticed before. What is the first thing you would do? Most likely you take out your phone and you go online, search up WebMD, type in your symptoms, and click on the first result. And would you look at that, you have melanoma. Now you're wondering if you should call your friends and family or your boss, let them know about this possibly deadly condition, and you start to spiral. Now you may be thinking this is a bit exaggerated, but more often than not, people do tend to go down this path, and they stress over what they find on the internet. This is because people fear what they don't know. If someone has a problem, they're most likely going to want to figure out a solution to it or get an answer. It could be the wrong answer, but it's an answer, and it provides comfort. But that's not what I'm here to talk to you about today. I'm here to talk to you about the risk of using the internet to find those answers when it comes to health. Yes, sir. The first risk that I want to touch up on is the risk to your physical health and well-being. Approximately 80% of people who self-diagnose use search engines, which leads to about 60% of those people using medical information websites such as WebMD or Healthline. Now this is where it can become tricky because, as you know, anyone can put anything on the internet, especially when it comes to marketing. So there are two technical terms that you should know. First one being the nocebo effect, which is the idea that a negative expectation or a belief about a treatment or intervention can lead to a physical manifestation of worsening symptoms or adverse effects. So let's say you have a stomach ache and all you have with you is Pepto-Bismol, but you read somewhere online that Pepto-Bismol will only make things worse for you, but you take it anyway because that's all you have right there and then. And next thing you know, you're vomiting more and you're more nauseous. The stigma that was created around the Pepto-Bismol because you read somewhere that it was bad for you manifested itself into negative or into physical symptoms. And then the other term you should know is the placebo effect, which is basically the opposite, which is where someone's condition is improved or a procedure seems to take effect just based on the belief that it worked, despite the fact that it may have been proven to be ineffective. So let's say you self-diagnosed with a certain condition and you were told that you have to take a certain medication or follow a certain regimen to fix it. Now this could easily be a part of a marketing ploy or a scam. And so you go to the drugstore and you buy whatever the internet tells you to buy, because if you listen to the internet and believe that you have something just because it says it, more often than not, you're going to listen to what it says to how to fix it. Because for all you know, you could have COVID or cancer. And you take whatever they tell you to take, and voila, you're cured. Or are you? You might have just cured yourself of perfect health. That is the placebo effect. It's your high expectations of the treatment created the feeling of getting better. These two effects can create, or the internet can create an increased sense of anxiety, stress, and fear. And with these two effects, they have shown to have manifested physical symptoms, which is why stressing over self-diagnosis through the internet can be harmful. Another risk that is involved with surfing the web to find your answers is the strain between your patient and doctor relationship. Sometimes people think when they have all the knowledge in the palm of their hands, that equates to being an MD with 10 plus years of experience. but with knowledge, in order to use that knowledge, you also need experience. About 41% of online self-diagnosers consulted a medical professional afterwards, and 82% of that 41% were confirmed by the professional, which means about 34% of self-diagnoses are confirmed and accurate, were accurate and confirmed by doctors. That's only a third of all self-diagnoses, which means the majority of these diagnoses can easily lead to unnecessary stress and worry and delay in appropriate care. Because, there are many, most if not all of our tests, diagnostic tests, are subjective to interpretation, which is where the experience comes in from the medical professional. So let's put this into perspective. Let's say you're in a courtroom and you insist on representing yourself in a case because you believe you know enough from watching Judge Judy every day. So instead of using a lawyer who has full experience of law, the court, and all that, you think that you can handle it, and most likely that probably won't work out for you. This is the same with doctors and patients. If a patient comes in insisting they know what is wrong with them because they looked it up, you can see how that can become a problem. Now, the last risk I would like to talk about is the risk to community and healthcare the healthcare system as a whole. About 15% of people who self-diagnose use social media platforms. The top 3 most prominent apps that are being used are TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram, with TikTok being the most common out of the 3. There are a lot of influencers out there who say they're experts, but could also be spreading false or misleading information. And especially now with the younger generation, people can become more impressionable and start to believe more and more of this information. Let's take a look at an example of how this can do more help than harm. This chart shows the total research funding towards autism by the National Institutes for Health. And through the passage of the bipartisan Autism Cares Act, nearly $5 billion more will be assured towards research and other valuable programs for those with autism or ASD. Now, there are programs set aside for people with more severe or more disabling forms of autism that prevent them from going out day to day and being able to live a normal life. Now, sometimes people who are online who also may have ASD tend to push for a more severe or disabling form of ASD, even though they might not have it, or they can still go out and live their lives to as normal as possible. Now that group of people is being added to the pool that group of people is being added to the pool of the other people who have the severe forms of ASD or more disabling forms. And there are pools of money, or there are programs that set aside pools of money for these people specifically. But now that pool is bigger, there's less money to go around for more people, which you can see why that can be a problem. I'm not suggesting that any one person is not deserving of care, but rather that we need, as a community, to be sure that the resources we have available I'm not suggesting that any one person is not deserving of care, but rather that we need, as a community, to be sure that the resources we are able to invest are indeed being invested in people who have been thoroughly evaluated and diagnosed by experienced professionals. Now, before I wrap up, I do want to reiterate that the internet can be useful in a lot of many ways when it comes to finding out more about health-related information. But we should not base any uncertainty or stress on it when your next doctor's visit could be just a phone call away. I know how easily people can be tempted to try and solve all their problems with their phones. I'm no exception to that. But I think that it's very important that we all take a moment and think, am I really an expert in this? Just because a little bot with a screen told me so. And who knows, maybe you are. But all I ask is that we take the time to ask ourselves, does this really make sense? And I promise if we take that time to do the thorough research, instead of just clicking on the first thing you see, the outcome will be much more positive for everyone.